Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for coming today, and thanks very much to Datamine for inviting me to present today, and to all of you for taking time out of your busy day. I'm just anything like mine. It's pretty hard to get out of the office. When Datamine asked me to present today, I was sort of pondered for a while what I would discuss. They sort of gave me an open forum, and there's so many important aspects to mining and lots of matters happening that are current and prevalent to everybody at the moment. I sort of didn't really know where to turn. So I decided to go with a bit of a broad brush effect and discuss how there's a myriad of other legislative commitments that we need to be knowledgeable of and comply with that are interwoven with the Mining Act and integral to maintaining the security of your tenure. So in many instances, actions, probably should move home, okay. So in many instances, there's actions related to compliance within the Mining Act, which also trigger actions in compliance with other legislation. For instance, you've got the Aboriginal Heritage Act, the Work Health and Safety Act, Native Title Act, Environmental Protection Act, and many, many others, okay? But I'm going to just sort of focus on a couple of these because 20 minutes is really not a lot of time to speak about everything, and I don't want to blow your mind. Okay. So that's just to bring that all to your attention. The grant of a tenement frequently comes with similar endorsements to that shown here, and I've sort of highlighted a few of the different acts that it's directing us to. And this little snapshot is just an example, okay? Tenements are obviously in different places and they're all going to have different interactions with underlying land. So the onus is on the tenement holder to familiarise themselves with the conditions and endorsements of each of their tenements and to ensure compliance, okay? So just to reiterate, each of your tenements will have different requirements. So it's very important not to think that your project, whilst all those tenements might be contiguous, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're all going to have the same endorsements and the same conditions. So it's really very important that you read the schedule of conditions that come with the grant of your tenement and go to Mineral Titles Online and check what those endorsements and conditions are. So they are, as I said, determined by the location of your tenements and the underlying land that it affects. So it's everything varies substantially from one tenement to another. The best way to identify underlying land and the effects it's going to have is to check your quick appraisal, which you can generate through 10graph. And that quick appraisal will identify underlying local government, underlying land and different types, as well as affected native title areas. So these are just a couple of snapshots from a quick appraisal to show you the various different areas that you might want to have a look at. But again, it's a snapshot, and it's different for all tenements, so please be aware of that. The approval of a program of work. So if you apply to do activities, ground disturbing activities on a tenement, you need to apply for a program of work through DMIRS. And when you go through that process, DMIRS reiterates the need for compliance with other acts with the inclusion of disclaimer similar to this little one. This approval does not remove the need for any other necessary approvals from other statutory authorities. You also might see something similar to the one below that, also in regards to a POW approval, where they're bringing to your attention that the Aboriginal Heritage Act is something that you need to consider when you're undertaking a program of work. So you get all these little snaps as to you need to look at something else. It's not just the Mining Act. Okay. Aboriginal Heritage Act, so basically significant ethnographic and archaeological value to the Aboriginal people. Obviously, Aboriginal heritage holds all of that. As such, Aboriginal heritage can take many forms that are not necessarily visually identifiable, and WA recognises the significance of Aboriginal cultural sites and objects of significance and manages the same through the Aboriginal Heritage Act 1972, hereby referred to as AHA. The AHA protects Aboriginal heritage by requiring approval for activities that may impact or cause harm to Aboriginal heritage. Compliance with the AHA is an essential requirement for all tenement holders. Doesn't matter how big your company is or how little your company is, or you're even an individual prospector, everybody needs to take care and be aware of the effects that their activities might have on Aboriginal heritage. By the way, the typo in the link is not me. That is a direct extract from Demers' website. Just so you know, as a tenement manager, I would never that. Oh, that's an interesting slide, isn't it? So if you have an area that has been identified as an Aboriginal site or a place, and you still need to work on that area, then you have to take action and apply for a Section 16 or Section 18, depending on the gravity of what you're going to do. It could just be access under Section 16. And then we recommend that all tenement holders undertake cultural awareness training if that opportunity is availed to them with the local traditional owners, just to help you identify sites and objects that may not be registered, and avoid any inadvertent and accidental breach of AHA, because penalties are applicable for breach of AHA, as they are for many of the acts that we're going to discuss today. Here we go, maybe I need to do it like this. When an exploration licence or a prospecting application is lodged, Demers is obligated to advertise the said application pursuant to Section 29 of the Native Title Act. So there's another one that's slipping into your Mining Act. To inform any affected parties of the intention of grant of that application and provide them with an opportunity to object to the expedited procedure. A similar notification process is available to mining licences under Section 31 of the Native Title Act. In essence, these actions are a trigger for the proponents or the applicants to commence engagement with the native title parties or the claimants or determinations, and it will also give the opportunity to commence mediation with the National Native Title Tribunal. So it's a bit of a flow-on effect. They notify them, there might be an objection, you'll have a relationship. You hopefully will have already had a relationship with that native title party, but then you can negotiate your agreement and hopefully it'll all come out in the wash and you will be able to get onto your tenement and do some exploration. So Section 29 of the Native Title Act also is applicable when the application is an amalgamation of tenements that has been lodged. Okay, so despite the fact that your original tenement or your primary tenement exploration licence in this example, there was no native title claim or determination over that area when you applied for it, maybe it was back in 1990. And the same with the prospecting licence, perhaps, that you want to amalgamate in. When you decide to bring them together and lodge an amalgamation, that triggers the Section 29, and you will have to take that amalgamated area back through native title process. Okay, so again, little actions that you undertake under the Mining Act trigger other act and compliance. In instances where your tenement falls within a government Indigenous land use agreement, so an ILUA, it is common that the grant of that tenement will list the requirement for you to enter into an agreement with the native title holders as a condition of grant. Similar to what you see in this first slide up here, where the tenement falls into the Esperance Noongar ILUA area, and it is a requirement that you've entered into agreement and registered the existence of that agreement with Demers. Demers also highlights the needs for compliance with the aforementioned condition in their notice of grant letter, as shown here on the second snip. That also reminds the holder of the fact that failure to comply with the need for an agreement is also a breach of the tenement conditions and thus a breach of the Mining Act. So you're being forced to work under the Native Title Act as part of your compliance with the Mining Act. Environmental Protection Act. You guys have seen a lot of this and we've had a few discussions on it already. So many tenements that impact conservation reserves, for example, will be granted subject to a condition similar to that one shown here. This additional approval needs to be considered when you're planning work to allow time for the same to be achieved prior to that work commencing. So you need to get your approvals in place before you can start that work. Sometimes a very difficult task to explain to the board or whoever's woken up this morning and said that they want to start mining in this particular area. So impact on reserves can be determined by a quick appraisal of your tenement, and the reserve areas can then be mapped on TenGraph as well, so you have a clear visual as to what the impacted area is, and then you can work around that. Under the Environmental Protection Act, which we'll call the EP Act going forward, it's an offence to cause serious or material harm to the environment. However, it is possible for that serious harm to be permitted pursuant to ministerial approval for implementation of an environmental impact assessment, clearing permit, works approval, and these all fall under parts 4 and 5 of the EP Act. If work is planned on your tenement requires removal of more than 10 hectares of native vegetation, for instance, and is not low impact, then a native vegetation clearing permit will be required under Part 5 of the Act. If the tenement affects an environmentally sensitive area, then the clearing permit may be required regardless of the size or the area of impact. So again, it's important that you're familiar with the EP Act to determine if the conditions under that are invoked by the work that you want to do on your tenement. I'm flying through this because I really hate speaking in front of a whole lot of people, so that's fine. Part 5 of the EP Act also requires the issue of the permit for ground disturbance that falls within the list of prescribed premises, which are all set out in Schedule 1 of the EP regulations. And this list includes, but is not limited to by any means, categories such as mine dewatering, mineral sands mining or processing, and screening of material. So again, the further through towards operation or production that you're going to go, you're going to have a lot more effects under the EP Act. So it's important that you are planning ahead for those and you're aware of what you've got to deal with going forward, even when you're just coming out of the greenfield stage. Okay, so don't just rest on your laurels and think it's all going to happen once you get there. You would all be familiar with the fact that DEMIR's tenement conditions and endorsements frequently refer to the necessity for compliance under other environmental acts, such as Waterways Conservation Act, the Rights in Water and Irrigation Act, the Water Agencies Powers Act, Metropolitan Water Supply Act. There's a whole pile of them, and they just go on and on and on, and this is really a very limited shot of what we're going to have to deal with. You need to check your tenement conditions and your endorsements and your quick proposal for other affected legislation. Compliance with these acts generally requires a notification and approval from the associated ministers or the issue of a permit specific to the work that you're going to undertake, like a water licence as an example. For instance, it's an offence under the Rights in Water and Irrigation Act to take water from any watercourse, wetland or underground water source, or construct a well without a licence. It's also an offence to obstruct or destroy or interfere with any watercourse, race or data flow. And these offences come with penalties, and they're pretty substantial. So it's probably more economical to actually go through the process of getting your approval, getting the water, getting it done correctly, than having to deal with a penalty later on. Under the Biodiversity Act, Conservation Act, which we'll call the BC Act, it's an offence to take, disturb or modified threatened ecological communities, also known as TEC, without an authority approved in accordance with the Section 40 of the BC Act and by the Department of Biodiversity, Conservation and Attractions. If TEC is on the tenement, then this is likely, but not always, to be recorded in the licence in an endorsement. If the tenement is in an area that's likely to have a significant environmental value, then, like, for instance, a state forest or a Class A reserve, we would recommend that you do a TEC search. You can do that through reserve. We would both online search and contacting the DBCA to confirm whether a TEC is or is likely to present on a tenement. TEC includes, amongst other things, critically endangered ecological communities, endangered ecological communities, and vulnerable ecological communities. And there's a couple of little pictures of some cute little endangered things that we need to be aware of, that you're probably not even aware of. I mean, there was a slide that you guys showed earlier when you had the pit. I think it was the very first presentation, and he showed that there was these little microorganisms living in that pit water that, generally speaking, the average person is not going to be aware of. Okay, but it is important that you make the effort, you do your environmental assessments, you do all of that, and you do these checks to see what might be in your area that's going to trigger the next action that you take. So do I need to do an environmental survey to make sure that none of these are actually in my area, or what do I need to do to get around that, and how do I comply with this act? Another good friend of ours, the Work Health and Safety Act of 2020 and its accompanying regulations came into effect on the 31st of March 2022. Whilst we are currently in 2024, a lot of those things are still transitioning into the mining industry, and the mining industry has its own specific work health and safety regulations. It is very important that everybody is aware of those. They are widespread, the implications across all realms of mining and exploration, and it's not exclusive to mining. So a lot of people think that it is, but it's not. So if you're doing exploration and you've got a driller on site, etc., well then your work health and safety compliance extends to their mental safety, their socio safety, and as well as their physical safety, and you need to be aware of those things. DMIR's approval for a program of work, for instance, requires that the tenement holder submits an exploration operation notification prior to the commencement of said approved work. It has been that way pretty much forever. I've been in tenement management for a very long time, and it always surprises me the amount of people that don't realise that they have to submit that EON. Now, the receipt of that EON, well, it always has given the Minister or the Mines Inspector an opportunity to visit your tenements, make sure that all the work that you're doing is being done correctly, and that perhaps your rehabilitation has been completed as you have indicated it would be on your program of work. The issue of an EON now can also trigger a requirement under the Work Health and Safety Act for submission of a quarterly status report. A QSR is essentially a statistical report that says how many people were on the site, how many people were injured, how many hours did they work, and etc. It's not complex, but you need to have details. So I guess, again, being aware of what each of these implications is under different acts means that you can prepare yourself for that. So if you're going out for a program of work and you know you're going to have drilling there, and you know you're going to have people coming in and out all the time, well then you need to start tracking who's there when, how many hours did they work, because you might have to report that under the Work Health and Safety Act. Whether or not you have to do a QSR is dependent on the total impact of the land and the type of work that's being undertaken, and prospecting activities are generally excluded from the need for a QSR. So, for instance, we have a client who has 4 mining tenements. She's regularly out there with her bulldozer prospecting, and it is prospecting according to DMIRS, and so she doesn't have to do a QSR. So it depends on what you're doing. And there's also, let me just say, without trying to be rude to DMIRS, a lot of confusion in the safety department as to when these things are required and who has to comply with what. So again, it's up to you to read the acts, read the regs, make your interpretation and act as to how you really believe it should happen. And if you're confused by it, contact DMIRS and ask for their assistance and their guidance specific to your project. If work on your tenement extends to mining operations, there are numerous other notifications, qualifications, certifications, compliance matters, and more that are triggered under the new WHS Act. That all of these are paramount to compliance with the tenement conditions as granted under the Mining Act. So you really need to take some time to familiarise yourself with the details to ensure you're compliant. And on that point, let me just say, like, if you need a certification, that takes time as well. Okay, so you've got to be thinking, if I'm, let's just say, a prospector, but I'm going to commence mining, then you might have to be an exploration manager and you have to do a certification under that. So you need to figure out where you're going to do that, how you're going to achieve it, how long is that going to take, because technically you can't undertake that work until you've got that in place and you've lodged the correct notification through the WHS. Notification of appointment to WorkSafe Commissioner is only required for 2 of the 5 key statutory positions, which are the Senior Site Executive and the Exploration Manager. And changes to these positions also have to be notified. So if you have an Exploration Manager and he's been registered, or she, under the SRS Act, and they leave and you've just slotted someone else in there, you need to let DMERS know under the SRS or via the SRS, which is the Safety Regulation System, in accordance with the WHS Act. Construction of a mine plant, again, goes on for multiple more approvals. So you might need a construction induction training, you might need demolition licence, you might need asbestos licences or a high-risk work licence. And there's just too many to indicate, basically, or to discuss in detail. So essentially, you've got to refer to the Act and the regs to ensure that you're submitting all the correct notifications, have the correct qualifications for your statutory positions, report unsafe incidents, comply with the on-site requirements, etc., etc. So there's multiple things that you need to work under the WHS Act, and should all take some time to read that. It's great fun. It's really good if you're struggling to sleep. And then we just talk about those. Okay, so wrapped it all up. In closing, this is a short presentation. 20 minutes is not enough to talk about things. I probably smashed it out in 10 anyway, because I just don't like to be up here. But okay, good. Essentially, I just wanted to take the opportunity to bring to your attention that there's not just the Mining Act that you're working under. If you have a tenement, doesn't matter what your tenement is, there's more than likely at least one other act or some other legislation that you're going to have to consider and allow time for when you're planning your exploration or your mining or your prospecting or whatever it is that you're doing. So it's basically was just an opportunity for me to sort of perhaps flag an obligation that you may not have been aware of, or to remind you to check the conditions and everything around your tenement to make sure that you are complying with everything. Hetherington, that's our esteemed leader, David Salem, who actually is located in Sydney. Essentially, we are the hub of our business is tenement management. Okay, so we manage all over Australia, all the different jurisdictions. We have Canada tenements and African tenements, and our clients range from your individual prospector right up to your big tier, top of the wazza mining companies. And we have a wealth of experience across all realms, including legal and environmental, and we're more than welcome to assist with any inquiries with regards to these matters or anything else around tenement management. Thank you for your time.